Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Tuesday's edition, and we are broadcasting all over the place today from Delray Beach, Florida, from Hartford, Connecticut, and from our studio in Irvine, California. Happy to have you with us today, Joe Visconti. Welcome back to Schaftlein Report. We got a lot to talk about today.
We sure do. Thanks for having me. I saw your list. I got emailed. I went, whoa, I've been out of touch for 2 hours. And in 2 hours, half of your topics get popped up.
Yeah, it's sort of amazing. I mean, let's start with what's really happening right now. And I stack this up in the unfortunate category. I didn't think they were going to do it, but basically Biden and Blinken, or let me take it back, whoever's running our government behind the scenes of Biden and Blinken, has basically told the Israelis to halt their invasion, their ground attack, until there can be more time to negotiate with hostages. And like Hamas typically does, they'll dribble a couple out every now and then. And, the world seems to think, oh, this is great, Hamas did it. No, it never should have been done in the first place. I mean, who in their right mind kidnaps an 85-year-old woman? I mean, this is insane stuff, Joe. And but we've seen this playbook before when Biden negotiated with Iran to get 6 Iranian hostages back. And what did Iran do? They apprehended more of them. So, I mean, give me your thoughts on this, Joe, because in my view, this thing is completely going the wrong way.
Yeah, there was a lady hostage, as you probably saw in one of the outlets. I think it was Breitbart, or maybe it was Drudge, where she said that they released her, and there's tunnels everywhere. It's a labyrinth of tunnels underneath Gaza, like rat maze, and so what does that mean? That means whatever we're seeing on the surface, on the streets, almost like in Vietnam, there's an underground, we have an underground military campaign that's going to have to go on. And what is the strategy there? So half of me thinks that, the Biden and the rest of those clowns in our country are blowing it, trying to stop the invasion. But at the same time, my thinking is that maybe the Israelis are like, we don't need more time, but exactly how are we going to approach this labyrinth? Where are we going to go? And can they pop up under a manhole and just lob bombs at our people and go back into the tunnels? This is not what I don't even think Israel thought this would ever have to happen. And so, I know they're delaying, but at the same time, the Israelis, and I think America's going in with them. I really think we're going to go in with so many troops because there's hostages there, and American hostages.
Yeah, I don't want to imply that Israel's not starting their offensive and solely because the Biden administration is leaning on them not to. I don't mean to imply that at all, but something is not right here, and I can't put my finger on it, but I believe that the Israeli military, they will go when they're ready to go, notwithstanding a request from Biden or Blinken. Now, polling out of Israel, for what it's worth, Joe, 70% of Israelis favor a ground invasion of Gaza. But you raised great points. In other words, okay, what happens then? Because this labyrinth of tunnels is a well-known phenomenon here. And if you look at the events of what's happening today, there's as many rockets that got launched towards Israel today as there was since the start of the war.
Exactly. And it could be a big trap, Mark. It could be a very big trap, and it most likely is. So a lot more thinking, and I'm for patience. I really am at this point, not because of the hostages, because they may already be dead, but just because of all the nations looking to prop up what's happening. I know it may not be one of your topics, but just the pro-Palestinian marches across the globe and in America, as though none of this butchery occurred. The political ramifications are going to be divisive, and they are already. I'm in a very predominant Jewish town, West Hartford, most Jewish people in all of Connecticut, which is a pretty wealthy state, and I've got 3 Israeli flags flying on all my trees in my home, big ones. Nobody in town. They flew Ukraine flags, they flew Black Lives Matter, the pride flags. Are you kidding me? They're afraid. They're afraid. And
I concur with you, Joe, because I saw some polling that shows Americans age 65 and over support the Israelis 95%. And yet young Americans age 18 to 24, formidable years where they're, the mush in between their skulls gets formed, 52%. It's still a majority, but 48% of Americans age 18 to 24, they don't support Israel. I mean, what's missing in this thing? 1,400 people were murdered by terrorists. And the Associated Press doesn't even call them terrorists. They call them militants. Joe, they're murderers and terrorists.
They're adding insult to injury. We've seen it all before, but we're accelerating to a really divisive time that's even beyond anything we can think. And the party system doesn't even matter at this point because the American Jews, 75% vote Democrat. And I think, not to play games here with party system, but they're putting the brakes on it right now. And I think that's why Biden went over there, because they were trying to hold that vote. But they don't like what they're seeing. And I hear the rumblings from all my Republican Jewish friends, and they're spying on the Democrats in our town. And they're like, they're angry, they're upset, but they'll still vote Democrat at the end of the day. Okay. And this is the problem. They just have this mental illness. I call it political mental illness. And I think the American people that are Jewish and American, get your flags out, start flying them like you did Ukraine and BLM and everything else. Just support Israel publicly, because if you don't, these rallies, hundreds of thousands at a clip, are going to increase to the point where it'll become like 2020 by next spring, where they'll be burning cities and everything, supporting whatever. I can just see it. It just looks like another rerun. And I guess the only thing we can do is really be vocal about this support, and don't let them forget, because people have already.
Let's draw a historical comparison here. Now, again, some of our younger viewers may not remember this, but again, in the 1980 campaign, there were 54 Americans held hostage in Iran.
Yes, and
that was wrapped around former President Jimmy Carter's neck, like an albatross. And sure enough, after Carter got beaten badly by Ronald Reagan in the election, and the day Reagan was inaugurated, those hostages were released. Why were they released? Because of the same threats that Trump made. You harm one American, your country will cease to exist. Yeah, and sure enough, those hostages were released when Ronald Reagan came into office. Now, again, I'm not trying to compare Joe Biden to Jimmy Carter. I don't think that's a fair comparison to Jimmy Carter, frankly. But I got to tell you something.
Yeah, something else that people aren't thinking about, it may be on our list of topics. I think we're going off it a little bit, but the perception is that Russia is weak. We got to remember, Hezbollah is Iran, Iran is Russia, and because Russia didn't intend to totally go into Ukraine, Kyiv, and take everything over, they didn't. Or maybe they couldn't, but if they couldn't, they're a paper tiger. They no longer are a world power if the perception of the world. So you're seeing China line up with this, Germany coming over to line up with Iran. And so what's happening is Russia is not strong anymore. So then you need a coalition of China, Russia, Iran. You'll see the Saudis and maybe others start to fall in line if there's butchery or the appearance of butchery by the indirectly by the Israelis. So what we have happening here is Russia and China, and this is the bigger geopolitical problem that maybe we're going to discuss it more, but it's like you pull a string and all of a sudden, like a piñata, boom, you hit it and all the candy comes out. We have to be so careful because we have idiots running our military at the highest level, not the generals that Trump had and that we wanted. And so I'm more concerned about the ramifications for nuclear war or mishaps.
Well, the Russian war in Ukraine is not exactly going according to plan. There were reports I saw earlier today of Russians fleeing Crimea. Now, again, I don't know if it's been independently verified, but yes, the Russians are bogged down in Ukraine. There's no question about it. But while that's happening, the Iranians continue to sell their oil to the Chinese. Yeah. That's happening. The U.S. has warned Iran about getting involved. They're already involved. They're supplying Hezbollah with weapons. Hezbollah's got way more weapons than Hamas has, Joe, and you're well aware of that. So to say that this is going to be a two-front war, look, it'll be a three-front war if Iran gets involved in this.
Yeah.
So I really think, and again, I know that having a Democrat in the White House and a Democrat Secretary of State leads to certain precautions. I get that. But I also know that when Trump was president, the Iranians heeded his warnings. Will they heed Joe Biden's warnings? I have my doubts.
No,
and so far,
yeah.
You follow what I'm saying. And if the average American's looking at this and they're saying, we've got this guy leading us, I'm just sorry. It just does not exude confidence, in the American people.
Yeah, well, it's very troubling because this should have been recognized as a war. When they war games the Middle East, which they always do.
Well, we're going to have to see how obviously it plays out on a daily basis, Joe. But again, let's go back to our central point here. Are the Americans trying to hold the Israelis back? The answer is yes. Are the Israelis holding the Israelis back? The answer to that's probably yes, too. So as this thing plays itself out, again, the Biden administration, they want to contain this thing. Even French President Macron was saying Hamas has to be annihilated. But then he went on to add, it's got to be done according to the rules of war. You haven't heard anyone disagree with that. No one in Israel has said they disagreed with that. But, Joe, I think we're in a perilous situation here. You have U.S. troops all throughout the region. There were rockets fired at U.S. troops on a base in Iraq today. You've got the largest missile attack going on in Israel since the start of the war. The protests, they're going to continue by young people. As we said, just here in America, 95% of Americans over the age of 65 support Israel. Only 52% of those 18 to 24 do. So, Joe, it's sort of a lot of balls up in the air right now, a lot of uncertainty. But I do know one thing. If Hezbollah moves to the north and or Iran moves, from the east, all hell's going to break loose in Israel. Listen, we're going to take a little break. We'll be back in 60 seconds with Joe Visconti, and we're going to talk about some of the domestic issues outside of Israel facing the U.S. Be back in a minute.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergence of central bank digital currency, which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off your purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like the equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get out of the system with the world's safest and most private assets, silver and gold. Call Kirk Elliott, PhD, 720-605-3900. Banks are supposed to be the safest placeholders for cash in the world, but in 2022 that changed. The Federal Reserve pulled out $2.5 trillion of liquidity out of the banks, and the Fed also changed the requirements so banks don't need to keep any funds on hand. This means banks are starved for liquidity and have now become very dangerous places to hold your assets. Get out of the system with the world's safest and most private assets, silver and gold. Call Kirk Elliott, PhD at 720-605-3900.
Welcome back, folks. And Joe, I want to shift away from Israel for a little bit. I want to talk about some issues we have going on domestically. Joe, that's southern border. Are you of the belief that possibly terrorists could be coming through that southern border? I mean, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, we had 2.4 million people come through this year, 2.3 last year, 1.7 million in Biden's first year in office. Under Trump, it was coming in at a trickle, about 450,000. Joe, make some sense of what's going on at that southern border, because a lot of Americans are nervous about it.
Well, I went to see Police State last night, Denise D'Souza's movie. It was premiering in theaters across America. And in that movie, there was a lot of data from people in government, which was really, he's remarkable the way he produces docudramas. But they do not know, coming right from the federal government, they do not know who's coming here. They do not know who they are. They do not know where 8,000 children are right now. So you have everything you could think of under the sun for criminal activity, from drug trafficking to child trafficking, sex trafficking, you name it. And we as a government do not know where these people are. Do we think Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, North Korea, China, do we think any of our adversaries, who some of them we trade with, do we think that they're stupid? They're not stupid. If they can do it, they'll do it. They'll do it not through NGOs like we like to do our politics. Well, they'll do it a different way, through rogue, cartels, drug lords. So they're using their drug lords and cartels are our NGOs. When we do things with Zuckerberg, et cetera, for your elections and whatever, non-governmental organizations, not-for-profits, they use cartels. And so, yes, you have to assume that at any day you could have sleeper cells. There's something important people should know about it. You can Google it. It's called net chain cell. It's about espionage or whatever, and you can do it for marketing. There's a net. You cast a net. There's cells, and then there's a chain along the line. So this is what we're looking at, the infiltration of our government. You have to assume this has been a national security risk. At what particular point is there any masterminds that are going to do something? Nobody knows. Just two things I would say: stay armed legally and buy all the oil futures you want because of the Middle East. Those are the two non-solicited suggestions I would make now.
Well, and then we add to that, there's been 36 people on the terrorist watch list apprehended at that border. So I'm not trying to raise the fear gauge here, but the reality is, when you've had over 6 million people come across your border in the 3 years that Biden's been president, I got to tell you, Joe, this guy could mess up anything. But let's get to some presidential politics here for a minute. It's really shocking news right now, and I think I've sort of figured out why. Biden's sitting here at an approval rating of 40%. That number doesn't change week to week, month to month. He is like locked in at 40. Okay, that's been happening. Now, interesting polling that's out there right now. Again, both of these races, Biden's up by 60 in the Democratic race, and the most conservative polling on the Republican side shows Trump's up 30, 35 points over his nearest competitor, which is still Ron DeSantis. I know the media tried to hype Nikki Haley. She got close, but he's still 30, 35 ahead. In some states, 40. In head-to-head matchups, Joe, Biden and Trump, 41-41. Not a sliver of difference, and that number's not moving, despite all these problems with Biden. And on the other side, they say, well, despite all the problems with Trump, throw in the other two candidates, Cornel West, Robert F. Kennedy, Trump and Biden, 37%, 37%. There are some people who said Kennedy's taking away from Biden. The data seems to me, as I read it, he's taking equally from him. That's going to change. And you and I know, if this election is Biden versus Trump, they're going to really be hyping third party. We'll know labels come in with a candidate. But to me, again, I'm a partisan Republican. I get it. But to me, it's shocking. Joe Biden, he had to break away from a conference the other day, and his aides directed him where to go. He can't even read teleprompters. And yet, Joe, he's sitting out there tied with Trump. What do you make of the state of the race right now, presidential politics, national and in the eight swing states?
Well, the swing states, I think Trump will pull that out by the time that next spring comes with the primaries. But the problem for Democrats is they would, and they're okay with voting for a ham sandwich. I mean, a ham sandwich may beat Biden in the Democrat caucus, and it's big. And here's why. And it's very funny. And I talked to a lot of Democrat friends, and we argue, but we talk. I'm like, do you understand? We don't care. We don't want a Republican. We don't want Trump, and we don't want Republican. We are Democrats. We are Democrats before we're American. We're Democrats before we're Jewish or Christian, or we're Democrats before we're white or black or Hispanic. We are Democrats first, and we will always be Democrats. And there's 100, I don't know how many there are, but there's enough, 80 million of them, that will always stay for the things they believe in the Democrat Party, which is they think they're defend the little guy, gay rights, abortion, government union complex, permanent welfare class. This is the coalition that has not changed, and it will never change. People are voting for themselves, and they don't care. They're not American. They really are not American. And you can see that they basically vote for the Communist Party and the Communist platform. And so that ideology is not going to change, no matter if a ham sandwich was up there with a microphone in front of it.
Well, the encouraging news for our side is that Trump was leading in 5 out of those 7 swing states. There's really 8 or 9 swing states total, so we'll play it out. But here's what's not really squaring with these poll numbers, Joe. In the 2020 election, President Biden got 90% of the black vote. I've seen recent surveys polling. He's polling around 74, 75%. Still a very large number, but he can't afford to lose 16% of the African-American vote and expect to be elected. I mean, there is no path to victory if he ends up polling in the mid-70s on African-Americans. How does that's what I'm a little confused about, Joe. If he's at that level of polling with a 40% rating, is it just the rest of the electorate is so disgusted with Trump? And again, folks, we can talk about national polls all we want, but Joe, you and I know this race is coming down to a handful of votes in 8 states. And
well,
loathe it. That's
the thing with the African American vote in Philadelphia. We're talking Wisconsin and the blue states that Trump won it before. If you spend hours, as I have on TikTok, and then you go and find African Americans yelling about Biden, saying I'm not voting for that fool, and they just go, and then you go look in the comment sections, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, and you read comments until your eyes bug out, and you see that the black Americans are not going to be, they're either going to stay home, rip their ballots if they get mailed to them. They're not voting for this idiot. They're just not. They're embarrassed and they're ashamed. He's a fool. Then they look at Trump, who's been persecuted legally, by the Democrat people in New York and all the blue states, and or Fulton County, which is blue, and they have an affinity with that. So they may not vote for Trump, but I think the effect that we saw, and I was there in Pennsylvania during election night, they don't come out in Philly. They don't come out in Pittsburgh. They don't come out in Milwaukee or Detroit. They're not coming out. They're just not going to. Let's call it 24 to 28%. He loses. He loses the election. And that's those swing states. Those are the things I'm talking about. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, right there, and even Fulton County, Georgia, and parts of Maricopa, Arizona.
There's no doubt about it.
And if he loses any of the American Jews who have had it, and they won't vote for Trump, but they stay home, or they write in Bobby or something because they got to vote or they want to vote, he will peel. This is an anomaly. So the polls, I think, are I don't think the polls are accurate. I don't mean that because I want Trump. I just don't think they're accurate. And I think there's a lot of dynamics going on.
Joe, explain to me, how did Joe Biden pay $3 million cash for a beach house in Delaware? He's the self-proclaimed poorest man in Congress when he was in the Senate. Joe, I mean, I know how it happened, but for the benefit of our audience, how did Joe Biden pay $3 million for that beach house?
You know, isn't it funny that the House, the Congress, can find and get the taxes of Trump and every dime and dollar on every corporation in every state that he works and owns property, every piece of paper back 25 years, and they can't get all the documents from Biden cartel. That's what I'll call them from now on, because it's a Biden cartel. And this is why we need to get this House back in session and get everybody on the same page and go after the Bidens. They're criminals, and that's why Ukraine's where it's at. Right now, that's why Iran's where it's at. They're all criminals, and they've been caught. And this mess is a nice way, like 9/11, to blow up, however Building 7 came down and however all the paperwork got lost. There's a lot of people with like a lot of paper trail lost right now.
Well, I mean, you talk about bringing a house back. How does Tom Emmer get, we talked about it briefly earlier in the show, how does Tom Emmer get the votes if 25 Republicans are against him? Will 25 Democrats swing over? Because according to the official Washington line, Tom Emmer's a reasonable, moderate Republican. Joe.
Yeah, Trump kind of blasted him today. He will need the Democrat Party, which don't be surprised that Democrats will make a move. Maybe not on this guy, but they will make a move when things get really close or tight. I think they're going to say, "Listen, we're going to have to join some Republicans and pick and save America. We're going to have to do it. We'll have to throw ourselves under the bus, but they'll pick a rhino or so, or whatever you want, or however it rolls." But I think you'll see a coalition of most Democrats and I don't know, 30 or 40 Republicans will going to pick the next speaker. That's probably how this goes down because the Republican Party, this is a problem. I'm a Republican. I'm not changing party. And I have this old saying, just because my brother is expletive, because he's that doesn't mean I'm changing my name. I'm not changing my party because they're losers and sellouts or whatever. And so the bottom line is they have to be weeded out. And not because they're right-wing extremists, because they're conservative, moderate Americans in this crazy time in the world.
Well, we got 2 minutes left, Joe. Let me ask you this. I mean, one comment, and then we're going to talk about the Georgia election case. Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., which has become incredibly violent. I mean, congressional members, staffers are having cars stolen, pulled over at gunpoint. I mean, the crime is literally out of control in Washington, D.C. My sister works there. I've advised her against doing certain things that she's been doing for years, full disclosure. And yet, Muriel Bowser's finally having an epiphany going, well, maybe these Black Lives Matter rules and all the way we change to be nice to the criminals, and maybe this stuff's not working. We're gonna have to have a mid-course correction here. Joe, is she right?
I think we're going to have a continued balkanized inner cities across America, and be divisive. And just look what happened to Israel when they were fighting politically amongst themselves. They opened themselves up to attack, and this is a crime wave on top of invasion. And we're going to be too busy. We will be hit in this country. I don't know where, I don't know how, maybe multiple ways, just because of the chaos. And the Democrat parties, don't fund the police and all that stuff is coming home to roost. DC, New York is just horrible. It's bad. Most of your cities are bad. The news is not reporting the real crime, and that's the big story. They're not reporting it, so you don't think it's really happening to anybody if it's not happening to you.
Well, Joe, I want to thank you again today for joining me with your comments. Always insightful. And again, you're leading the flag for the good guys up in Connecticut. Stick with it, my friend. I want to close it out with this, folks. Janet Ellis pled guilty in Georgia, the third person. They watered down the charges to basically, no jail time, probation, a tiny fine. Folks, they're 3 for 3 in Georgia. Yeah, they're not conspiracy charges they're guilty of, but they're 3 for 3. More to follow on that. That's it. We're out of time. Thanks for viewing and listening. We'll be back on Thursday. See you then.